Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
Hello students. Now let's talk about the workers' organizations. Now before the students, we were talking about the reign of Nicholas II, Tsar Nicholas II, right? So here, what did we talk about? We saw that Russia was an autocracy. Also, we learned that serfdom was removed in the year 1861, but the conditions of peasants as well as the workers who were working in the factories and industries, it was not quite good there, right? So we learned that the peasants who had the holdings, it was quite small and also uneconomical, right? They were quite poor. And also when we are talking about the workers who were working in the industries and the factories, they were also not in a good position. They were not living a better life there. Why? Because men, women and children, all these people who were working in the factories, they had to work for longer hours and the wages that were given to them was quite small, right? It was not sufficient for them to run their family and unemployment was quite common in Russia. So definitely because of all these things, this section, they were quite agitated, right? With the autocracy here, with the Tsar here. So, and when I am telling the name Tsar, it means that I am referring to the Russian king or the Russian emperor. And at present, we were talking about Nicholas II. Okay. Now here students, continuing the topic, we have to understand different organizations, the workers' organizations that were formed in Russia, right? Because it was this group only that fought, that rose to fight against the king or the emperor here. Now, three main workers' organizations were formed in Russia. The first one here is Emancipation of Labor Group. And when was it formed? So, it was formed in the year 1883 for the welfare of the workers in order to fulfill their demands. These organizations were formed in Russia. So, what are you seeing here? We are seeing that people or the workers, different sections, they are forming these organizations, they are forming these groups in order to challenge the highest authority. Why? Because Nicholas II here, he was now seen as the autocrat of all the Russians. Why students? Because he was being backed up by whom? By the nobles and the church. And they were given certain privileges in Russia. So therefore, the disadvantaged group here, who is that disadvantaged group? The workers, the peasants, the serfs, the poor people, landless laborers here, right? So here we see that they had to struggle for getting equal rights, right? To get more wages, to work for less hours and so on. Now the second important party here is the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, right? And this party was formed in the year 1898. Now this party is really important. Why students? Because based on this party, we see that there were two groups, two factions that were formed. And these two factions, they turned out to be the two most important organizations here, two most important groups here in Russia. Okay, when you are talking about the people who were fighting on behalf of the peasants, who were fighting on behalf of the workers, and all the people who were seen as the disadvantaged people here. Now, in 1903, in the year 1903, what do we see? We see that the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Now the name is indeed quite long here, but you have to keep in mind that was formed in the year 1898 because people now had differences on a lot of issues. So it was divided into two groups here. Now what are these two groups here? The first one here is Mensheviks and the second one is Bolsheviks. Now have you heard these terms? Yes, You have heard these terms. Now, Bolsheviks, we learned it in our first topic when we were talking about the significance of the Russian Revolution, right? Now, talking about the literal meaning of these terms here. When we say Mensheviks, what does that mean? Let us see. When we are saying Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, do you know what does that mean? If not, let me tell you. Now, when we are saying Mensheviks, it means that literal sense here is one of minority. And when we say Bolsheviks, it means one of majority. Okay, so these two terms here, this means that when we are talking about Mensheviks, this was a minority group. When we are saying Bolsheviks, they were the majority group here. Now, why was this difference, and what were these differences between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks? Now, when we are talking about Bolsheviks, we see that they were the one who formed the government. Which government? What type of government? So, they formed the communist government in Russia. Right, students? So, these were the powerful group here. But when we are talking about their ideologies, we see that Bolsheviks, they were the people who believed that revolution was necessary. In short, it means that they believed in the necessity of a revolution. Okay, to bring about change, they believed in that process, right? In order to do the for the upliftment. In short, for the upliftment of the workers, of the peasants that they were fighting for. Now, when we are talking about the Mensheviks, they had a different mindset here. Now, the Bolsheviks, they were headed by Lenin. We are going to talk about Lenin after this. Now, Lenin was a very important person. He played a very important role in the revolution that happened in Russia. Okay? And he believed in the ideologies of Karl Marx. Now, when we will talk about Lenin, I am going to discuss about this as well. But here you must know this point. When we are talking about Mensheviks, they believe that parties should be modeled on the lines of the parties in countries like France or England. So, they believe that bourgeoisie should also be included, right? Contribution of all. But when we say about the Bolsheviks, they believe that this should be, the participants here in this party should be mainly the peasants, the proletariat class here, right? So, they did not want all the other people to join the group, but here we see that they wanted the party that should be modeled on the lines of the parties that were there in France and England. But people were not in favor of this. Why? Because they saw that in Russia there is autocracy, right? But when we are talking about France, when we are talking about England, here we see that there was, let me write it again for you. For England, France, here we see that there was democratic political system that was quite different from that of Russia. Therefore, they did not believe in this whole idea of what the people who belong to this group, that is Mensheviks, they wanted to say. So, this was this broad difference between these two groups, that is Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. One believed in the revolution, but they also said that the participation should be quite limited, and also the quality of the people who are participating, it should be good, right? They are fighting for the peasants. They should include the peasants here, the peasants group here, and not everyone, unlike what the Mensheviks were trying to say. Okay, so you have to remember this basic difference here. The third group here that was formed, it was the Socialist Revolutionaries. Now, this was a party formed by the Russian peasants. Okay, Now, the principal objective was to end the feudal system in the country, right? Now, feudal system, do I have to repeat it here? Because we already have talked about it time and again, right? When we are talking about the French Revolution, we have learnt. Here we can say that it was a system prevalent in Europe in the Middle Ages, right? Between lord and vassals or serfs. The conditions of the serfs or the peasants was quite bad. They had to work under the lord, right? They had to pay rent. They were given land in exchange of the service that they had to provide it to the lord. So these are some of the important points that you have to keep in mind here. Now these were the three prominent workers' organizations in Russia. Now coming to the exercise section here, we have a question that says, when was the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party formed? Now, when was it formed? Quite easy. It was formed in the year 1898, right? Because from this only we see that there were two groups formed within this party here, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And when was it divided? So, you can remember the year 1903. Now, the second question here is, explain the difference between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Now, I have given you some extra information not mentioned here. So, you can say that the literal meaning Bolsheviks here is, of the Bolsheviks here is one of the majority. They also believed in the necessity of revolution and headed by Lenin. They believed that the participation of people, of the peasants specifically, should be limited and quality of people included in the party should be good, right? So people who are adamant, who want to fight or who want to challenge the system, they were invited in the group, right? So he focused on number and the quality of the participation of people. Now when we talk about the Mensheviks, we say that they were one of the minority. But their idea was quite different, participation of all with which they believed and also inclusion of bourgeoisie. But one more important point here and the most important point here in fact, it is that they wanted to work on the party lines based in England, work based on the party lines that was based in England or France, right? So basically very much different from the working of the Bolsheviks here. The majority group here, the minority group here and the Bolsheviks, they won and they took the control of the government after the revolution. So these are some of the points that you have to mention here. Thank you.